Welcome back to the Chara Project. I'm Heather.
I'm Sarah.
Here at the Chara Project, we're all about helping you build confidence in studying the Bible. And we know that the Bible is the literal word of God, and it's written in a diverse style of writings, including various figures of speech that are not always communicated in a way that makes it so that we should be taking it literally. So today we wanted to talk about that. We want to talk about how do you determine when a passage you're reading in the Bible is meant to be taken literal versus figuratively. In fact, this concept shouldn't be new to us because we have this kind of speech in our daily way we talk.
All the time.
All the time. Like good things come in small packages. He lit up like a Christmas tree. Skating on thin ice. I actually was talking to my daughter about that one the other day, and she's like, I don't know what that means. So we're having to train our children on how to talk with these figures of speech. We have to train ourselves the same way with the Bible. And so, Sarah, we're going to use some common sense today. You're going to help us understand kind of how to do this well. I'm assuming we should first start by defining what is the difference between literal versus figurative. Just can you give us like a starter spot to kind of anchor us and how are we defining these words?
Of course. Yeah. Well, when we talk about something being literal, I mean, really it's what is actually being said here. It's accepting things at face value, exactly as they were said. A couple examples you find in the 10 Commandments. You shall not steal. You shall not murder. We're supposed to take those at face value, right? But then there's also figurative or a lot of, symbolic language in the Bible. And this is something where the text transcends what is plainly said. The meaning transcends what is plainly said. It's painting a picture to emphasize a point. An example in Proverbs 9:1, it says, wisdom has built her house. The author isn't really talking about a house that was built by a woman named Wisdom. It's trying to paint a picture and communicate something in a unique way.
Totally. And so we've run into that across the Bible. But there is a misconception that I think we should, if you don't mind us like talking about it for a second, that we can often hear people say, the Bible was meant to be read literally. And I need to be reading the Bible literally. And so I think there's a misconception of what that really means when somebody says that. Can you clarify what we're really talking about there?
Right. Yeah. When someone says this, it doesn't mean that every word should be taken as literal. That's not necessarily what they're saying. When the Bible is read literally, it means that the Bible's message is real. When people say that, it should be read literally. It's really that the message is real. The text should be understood as straightforward. These are factual accounts of actual events, of histories, of teachings that the original hearer would have understood. So these things should be considered real. However, there is an important distinction, and I think the way we speak, so I'm glad you're bringing this up, Heather. Figurative language in the Bible does not deny its truth or its significance or the spiritual reality. Symbolic language can point to real truths, and the original hearers would have understood this, and they would have known this, and they would have been used to this style of writing, of communication. For instance, describing God as a rock or a shepherd is metaphorical, but conveys a real attribute about God that the original audience would have understood.
So why do you think that figurative language is in the Bible? Why did they write in this way?
Well, I mean, honestly, I think it's similar to the reason we use figurative language all the time in our speech today. We're doing it to convey a point. We use these words to paint pictures, to capture thoughts, to capture people's imagination, to make a point. Yeah. We're going to go through a lot of these different styles, like hyperbole and metaphor, and we're trying to make a point. And so the Hebrew writers were doing the same thing.
Oh, yeah.
But there's three reasons that figurative language was used by the writers in the Bible. So let's talk about those real quick. One is really to convey deep truths, to convey abstract, spiritual, and theological truths in relatable terms, relatable ways, right? To engage, to help make texts more memorable and engaging in a heavily oral culture. And we have to remember that, right? This was an oral culture. Most people, the original audience, would have heard the Bible. So you're saying things in a way that they can maybe remember them.
Yeah.
Right. Also to persuade, to evoke emotion, to motivate action. What's interesting is we've done study and talked about how to study parables. All of these things that we're talking about here, the reason that we're using symbolic language to convey deep truths, to engage, to persuade, those are all reasons that Jesus spoke in parables as well.
Oh, that's fascinating. Well, and so you're speaking to something about how the original audience would have heard it, and it reminds me of a lot of times when we're on this podcast, we talk a lot about using the Chara Bible Study Guide to be able to understand kind of the author's purpose and their writing style, whether it was prophecy versus poetry, and also unpacking the history around the culture to understand how the original audience would have heard it, how it was intended to be taken. I'm assuming that that's a little bit of what we need to unpack as we uncover how to determine if something is literal versus figurative. So, like, walk us through it. What's the process that we walk through in order to understand literal versus figurative? Like, what should we be looking for?
Yeah, there are a couple tips, but you're right. I mean, in any passage, applying the Chara Bible Study, those principles, like looking at the context, looking at all the history surrounding the passage will help you. But here is kind of a few guidelines. Assume a literal meaning to the biblical text when there's no good reason not to. Yeah. It's almost a good place just to start. Assume that it is literal. Unless, there's a couple of reasons, and we're going to get into those. But also if the surrounding context supports the text to be read in its plain sense. And that kind of it'll make sense when you're reading.
Well, and we should be careful a little bit, if I could just jump in, because I feel like sometimes it's very easy for us to want to assign some hidden meaning and like spiritualize certain texts that might challenge us. And so we kind of put the wrong application onto something that was meant to be more literal than figurative. If I could put that caution out there for us.
I think we do that all the time. I see that in Bible study a lot, as we're trying to dive into a passage. And I think there's sometimes a tendency to kind of assume a hidden meaning in something where there wasn't intended to be. That really wasn't the point.
Again, understanding the original audience, how they would have heard it, totally influences how we apply it to our own lives. We have to start understanding how they would have heard it.
Well, and going back to like the author's purpose, was that truly the author or the speaker's purpose in what they're communicating? And you have to look at more context to figure that out.
I love that.
Yeah, absolutely.
That. Okay, so that's how we assume literal meaning is when there's no good reason not to, and when we look at the surrounding context. How do we look at how do we figure out figurative?
Okay, so we're going to assume figurative, or that it might be figurative or symbolic, when the surrounding context doesn't allow a literal interpretation. Is the statement literally possible? For example, in Job 38:8, it says, "Who shut up the sea when it burst forth from the womb?"
There's no seas bursting forth from a womb that I'm aware of.
Right. Okay, so I think we read that and we're like, okay, yeah, that's symbolic here. Yeah. Also assume that it is figurative it might be figurative if it's a dream or a vision that uses symbolic language. There's a lot of that, like in parts of Daniel, where Joseph has dreams early on. A lot of these are filled with symbolic language.
That's good. Yeah.
Let's see. Also assume that it might be, symbolic language if a literal meaning is immoral, or contradicts the author's purpose. Or contradicts scripture in some way. So here's an example of this one. Jesus says in Luke 14:26, "If anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple." Okay, so if you don't hate your mom and dad, you can't be my disciple.
And yet we're supposed to love everybody.
Right.
That sounds like it would potentially contradict his other teachings.
Yeah. Okay. Jesus also tells us to love your neighbor as yourself.
Right.
So this seems contradictory. So maybe when Jesus says this, he's using some kind of figurative language, hyperbole here. That was an example we're going to get to in just a minute. But it tells us, okay, wait, the Bible can't contradict itself. That's one of our key principles that we talk about. So maybe there's some symbolic language being used here to convey a point, a strong point.
Very, very. It's one that I know many people cringe at when they hear.
Right.
For obvious reasons, he was trying to get everybody's attention.
Yeah. There are also certain types of genres, writing styles that use this language a lot.
Yeah.
Poetry, prophecy, even parables, all of these writing styles use symbolic language a lot. So just be on the lookout for that. Again, I think we're kind of used to that. I mean, poetry is full of symbolism.
Truly.
In figurative language. It's also, if it's obviously a figure of speech. So an example of this, Jesus says all kinds of things, right? It's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to enter the kingdom of God. I think that one's a little bit obvious that this is some kind of figurative speech. Jesus does this quite a bit.
Yeah, he definitely he does. So there, and we've already touched on a few of them, but there are a lot of different types of figures of speech that are kind of strewn throughout the Bible. Sarah, do you mind walking us through the examples of like what are these different types that we should be looking for? And I know that the list could go on, but can you give us like a top 10 list or something of that nature that can give us some anchoring on what we should be looking for when it comes to figurative language? Okay.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's talk about 10 of them. And I think some of these are going to be familiar and you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. We use these all the time. And some might be kind of new. So let's talk about them. The first one is personification. And this one is when attributes of humans are ascribed to non-human things like objects or even animals. And so personification animates the natural world or abstract ideas, emphasizing God's sovereignty over creation or the emotional weight of events. Okay, let's give some examples here. The trees clap their hands and the mountains sing for joy. We find that in Isaiah, okay? Or in Genesis, it says, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground.
I've never heard of actual blood crying, but I get the personification that's being pushed there. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I mean, and we do these same things today. The wind is whispering, or there's, I'm trying to think of another one. The storm angrily slams against the coast, right? Like we have the wind howls. We have these personification attributes. We do this a lot with our pets.
We do.
If anybody's a pet owner out there, Sarah and I both are, and we oftentimes almost act like they're humans in the way that we treat them and also talk about them as if they're just another little human walking around our house.
I even talk on my dog's behalf.
Oh, of course we do. Of course we do. I am the mouthpiece for Smokey,
right?
Our cat. So yeah, I get that.
Yeah, exactly. So kind of a subset of this personification is anthropomorphism, and this is describing God with human features or actions. So in John 4:24 it says that God is spirit. And so that means that God wouldn't have a body, right?
Right.
And yet
he's not going to have human attributes.
Right. And yet we use human attributes, at least in part, so that we can wrap our minds, our finite minds, around an infinite God.
Yeah, like he has eyes and ears and he hears.
Exactly.
And, like he gives us breath. There's all those type of things we often will say to try to give him some human form, even though he isn't human.
He's not human, but it helps us understand this infinite God.
That makes sense.
Right.
I love that.
In a very relatable way.
I like that.
Yep. So that's another one. So number 2, let's talk about hyperbole. This is something we use a lot, and it's, exaggeration to make a point.
Yeah.
To emphasize a point. It grabs the attention, underscores the seriousness or urgency of a teaching. Again, we already talked about in Luke 14, if you don't hate your mom and dad, then you cannot be my disciple. Jesus is making a point here, right? And then there's a cost to being a disciple. And his point isn't, and so he's saying something very kind of jarring. If you don't hate your mother and father, or even yourself, you can't be my disciple. It kind of,
get your attention.
It gets your attention. But he's saying this, he's using hyperbole to make it a point. There's a cost to being a disciple. Another one, Jesus talks about if you're sinning, to cut off your hand or gouge out your eye. Yeah, no, the Bible is not actually encouraging you to cut your body. Jesus' point here is to take sin seriously. So Jesus uses hyperbole a lot.
Yeah, I mean, when we do this as well. Like I told you a million times. I feel like I said that to my kids in the last week. Or even sports. The other day, we went and watched a game. It was 53-10. It was not our team that won, and the team killed us. They didn't actually kill us, though we felt like it at the end. But yeah, we use hyperbole often in our language for sure.
Let's talk about the third one here, idioms. Idioms are like short little expressions, peculiar expressions or sayings that we use really all the time. And we see this in the Bible too. They did it back then too. I mean, in Genesis, there's a few of them. Adam knew his wife. Well, today we might say that he slept with his wife, which is another idiom. You might still have to describe that to your elementary school student, although you may choose not to quite yet. But we're still
my daughter was reading the script before and like looking over our podcast notes before this, and she's like, "What is this? He slept with her?" And I had to explain what it was all about. We had a little health class before the podcast video got turned on.
In Genesis, it also talks about Abraham being gathered to his people. This is another way of saying that Abraham died and it was gathered to his people. That would have been very familiar to the original audience. We have so many idioms to this day. I mean, today.
We really do. In fact, I remember teaching this concept. I was teaching English as a second language over in the Czech Republic, and this was the one that struck them the most funny, because I would say things like raining cats and dogs, and they were like, "What? Like, what are you talking about?" And I'm like, "No, that's an idiom. Like they're like, I can't even explain what the rationale of where this thing came from, or the fact that absence makes the heart grow fonder." We oftentimes will use this form of speaking to be able to communicate a point. It's very common for us. Yeah.
Absolutely. We use it all the
time.
Yep. Number 4, irony. Irony as, a statement that says the opposite of what is meant to make a point or for emphasis. Again, we get this when I think intuitively we understand irony. It challenges assumptions and it invites readers to reconsider their perspectives. Some examples here: Paul uses irony to address the arrogance of the Corinthian church. And he says, "You are already filled. You have already become rich. You have become kings without us." He's using irony here to really humble them.
Yeah.
Also, James, he does this as well. He uses irony to address a superficial faith that lacks transformation when he says, "You believe that God is one? Good. Even the demons believe and they shudder." Like, your belief in God alone is not enough. Even the demons do that.
Oh, but what's so fascinating is irony almost has a little bit of a drip of sarcasm to it. Like I think of today when we talk about it, it's like, man, what a beautiful day when it's thunderstorming outside.
Yeah.
Right? Or, oh, great, after you spill a drink on the floor. It's not really great. We're just using almost a irony or a sarcasm a little bit to be able to communicate the opposite of it's emphasizing. Like I called a dog the other day tiny and he's really, really big, right? Like we do this as a way to be able to create emotion. It
Yeah.
really does. It's creating kind of a reaction to the ironing does.
Yeah, we quite often speak in figurative language.
More than I think you realize.
Yes. It makes me wonder how often we speak in the literal sense. All
We probably should more often.
I know. Right? Maybe we should. All right. Number 5, similes. And similes are very closely related to metaphors, so I'll talk about both real quickly here. Similes are comparing one thing to another, using like or and as. Like or as. They clarify ideas by drawing these parallels to familiar objects or experiences. So an example, as the deer pants for the water brook, so my soul pants for thee, O God. That's in a psalm. Also, we have Abraham who says, God who says to Abraham, "I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth," meaning there's going to be a lot of them.
Yeah.
You're going to have a lot of descendants.
Yeah, and we would say today something like she moved through the crowd like a ninja. I mean, that's how they say about me, but I don't know. I don't know about you, but we say that kind of stuff all the time. But metaphor you were saying is very similar. It just doesn't use like and as.
Right. Yeah. It's the same thing. Comparing two things without using like or as. So examples would be in John 15, "I am the vine, you are the branches." In Genesis, "The floodgates of the heavens were opened." The sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. That's in Ephesians. Psalm 23, "The Lord is my shepherd." You see just a lot of metaphors, again, very similar to similes, but I think this is kind of common. We use these a lot today as well.
Yeah, I would say we do. I'm thinking of a couple of examples that we use today, but social media is a double-edged sword. It connects us, but it also can divide us, right? Like it's the literal sword, but it's actually compared to one. We often will say double-edged sword for a lot of things, I think. But wall of rain. There's probably a ton of them out there that we could be speaking to, but it's very similar to simile. It's just that the lack of like and as.
All right, number 7, let's talk about paradox. And this is a statement that can seem absurd or self-contradictory or contrary to logical thought. But the more you look into it, it reveals an underlying or deeper spiritual truth. For example, this is in Matthew, and Jesus said a lot of these again. He used a lot of paradox. "For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life will save it." It seems kind of contradictory, right? And again, this goes back to that oral culture.
Oh,
I think.
absolutely.
When you say something like this, it stands out and it captures your attention and makes you think about it.
Right.
But on a similar note, he says, "The first shall be last and the last shall be first." Used these kinds of statements quite a bit.
Yeah.
They're
and
all
very memorable.
Yeah, absolutely. It's referred to as a chiasm, is when you have the first part of a statement being reversed, really, flipped in the latter half. The first shall be last and the last shall be first was a writing style also.
I could see that. I mean, today I think we would potentially think of a paradox in our own world as something where we're connected online, but yet we're also the most isolated communities ever, just because of us all being on our phones, right? So there's this paradox that you see coming together. I don't know if I have as quippy of a saying as the stuff that Jesus has that we do today, but Jesus had some good memorable lines for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Then we have rhetorical questions. These are questions that were asked for a dramatic effect, really the point wasn't to get an answer.
Yeah.
The point was to really get them to think about where they're at. An example that God says in Genesis is anything too hard for the Lord. We know the answer to that, but by asking the question, he's making a point that we need to remember.
Yeah.
Right. So that's rhetorical questions.
Yeah, and we do this often. I mean, I do this in my office. Hey, is it Friday yet? I'm not asking everybody to be like, yes, in one day it's going to be Friday. That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking like, hey, is it the weekend? Are you ready for a break? Right? We do this. I do this with my kids a lot. Not really ever actually asking for an answer. I just want them to be thinking about how they're behaving or what's going on in the home. I think we could easily be asking rhetorical questions all the time without even realizing we're doing it.
Oh, for sure. We really do.
We do.
Especially as parents. All right, number 9, let's talk about symbolism. Again, this is something that the Bible's full of symbolism.
Yeah.
Using objects or numbers or even images to represent abstract ideas or spiritual realities. And again, they convey profound theological truths. That's often what these are doing, but they do this in a compact and memorable way. An example that we see in Revelation 5:6 is the lamb. The lamb symbolizes Jesus Christ, but it also represents his sacrifice and his purity, and it's tied to the Passover lamb that you go all the way back into Genesis. You see this theme of the lamb throughout
the whole Bible. I was just going to say it's not just in Revelation, right? We see it throughout, this idea that Jesus is the Passover lamb that's come to take the sins of the world, which is beautiful. Today we have like the white dove symbolizing peace, or the pink ribbon with breast cancer awareness. We have our own symbols that we use within our society today. None are as strong as Jesus being the lamb. And like, what a powerful symbol to remind ourselves of who he is and why his sacrifice matters so much, though.
Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah, you're going to see it throughout the Bible, a lot of symbolism.
Yeah.
The 10th and final one that we're going to talk about, we save for last so that we can really focus on pronouncing it correctly. Synecdoche.
Synecdoche. You got it.
Yeah,
You
synecdoche.
nailed it.
And it's where a part of something is used to represent a whole, or the opposite, or the whole is used to represent a part. It can also be a singular for a plural, or a plural for a singular. Let me give you some examples here because that all sounds kind of confusing. The law. The law is referred to, it's used to refer to the first 5 books of the Old Testament.
Yeah.
All 5 of them can be wrapped up in the one saying, the
Yeah.
law, right? Also in Psalm 44:6, I do not trust in my bow, nor does my sword save me. So here we have bow and sword. I combined those two.
You did good.
To board. They represent all the weapons of human strength, right? So this is representing more than is actually being said.
Yeah, and this happens a lot even in our own culture. We say all hands on deck, and we really are not talking about we just want your hands on nor is there usually a deck. Usually it's like, hey, everybody needs to help out. We're looking for all the bodies to be in one room to help somebody out. But we just say all hands on deck. Still, some of our idioms and some of our like synecdoches that we do, synecdoches,
Yes.
I often wonder what the origin of some of these things are, because I'm like, I don't know where we got that, but it's very funny.
Oh, and it's funny. My dad, I think generationally, right? He comes up with all of these ones where it's like, what are you talking about? And honestly, with him, you can't tell if he's making them up or if they truly were
That's
something.
funny. He's a jokester like that.
Well, but different generationally. I mean, I just had my parents were just in town, and the figures of speech that he uses versus what their grandkids, their teenage sons use. It's like you almost need an interpreter.
Oh, truly.
Right. Just talking, this is just within a couple generations,
Truly.
let alone we're talking 2,000 plus years ago. But the Bible, those people used a lot of the same figurative language.
No, I love that you're anchoring us back here of why do we care? Why do we care about whether or not we understand cultural versus or the literal versus figurative? And I think part of it is that when we understand that some of the Bible, the truths of the Bible are communicated in figurative or symbolic language, we can then start to understand, well, what was actually being said? How would the original hearers hear it? So that we don't just throw it away and say, I don't want to hate my mother and father, so I'm just going to throw the whole Bible away. Mm-hmm. That's not what we want. We want you to understand God's word. And the way we do that is saying, that is a hyperbole. We know that is Jesus trying to get a reaction. And he's actually just saying, love less. Are you willing to put me over your family in order to follow me? That's all he was saying. Mm-hmm. But I think we can often misconstrue a lot of passages in the Bible by by not seeing the difference between literal versus figurative. So, Sarah, I
Yeah.
just want to thank you for walking us through all of these. We actually have a full article on our website that actually walks through all of this. If you want it in written form and want to kind of just digest it that way, go and check out our literal versus figurative article on our website, as well as download the Chara Bible Study Guide that's going to help you learn how to understand what questions to ask when studying the Bible, because this question is in there of understanding the culture and how the authors would have intended the original hearers to hear the message. We are offering up resources for you at very low cost and really for free, on the purpose of helping you build confidence in studying the Bible. We'd love to hear stories from you on what verses you've run across that have been confusing to you. We'd love to know what has been tricky around figuring out the literal versus figurative. So put a comment in there, like and subscribe, and we hope you continue to join us as we understand how to build confidence in studying the Bible. Thanks for joining us today.